Welcome everyone to WomenHeart's Heart Talks. I see that all of you are coming into the room, so we'll wait a few more seconds before we get started. Hello, everybody. I'm Celina Gorre, the CEO of WomenHeart. Thank you so much for joining us today for our Heart Talks entitled Learning to Thrive with Heart Disease, Stories of Resilience. You know, this is a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and certainly something that we were excited to talk about during this Heart Month. Joining me today are two of our stellar champions. One is Gwen in Annapolis, Maryland, who has been a champion since 2005. And the other is Janet Dennis, who's in Philadelphia, and she has been a champion since 2007. So when they talk about resilience and thrivership, they mean it. It's been their dedication and commitment to women living with heart disease has been a long road for them. We're also joined today with Dr. Christine Crawford, who is an adult and child psychiatrist based in Boston, and also the associate medical director at the National Alliance for Mental Illness. So I welcome all three of you. And the way we're going to run today is I will turn it over to the champions first to share their stories. And then Dr. Crawford will provide some insights into sort of the mental health and wellness aspects of women with heart disease. And then we will, in the second half of our Heart Talks today, we will have a broader discussion. I mean, just really engage and go a little bit more deeply into some of the topics that come up. So without further ado, let's get right into it. I want to start, Gwen, with you. If you can briefly tell us about your heart story and how you've coped with the condition that you've had your entire life.
Thanks, Celina. And thank you to WomenHeart for addressing this really important issue and reminding all of us of the real lifelong connection between our head and our heart. So again, I'm coming to you from Annapolis, Maryland. I've lived with heart disease my entire life, but was only diagnosed with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy about half my lifetime ago, which I was 32 at the time. Hypertrophic cardiomyopathy is a often misdiagnosed condition. It is genetic in origin. I had symptoms at birth, but obviously at that time, there wasn't really the knowledge there. It causes a thickening in the heart muscle wall, and as a result, you can get short of breath, or you can commonly have arrhythmias like atrial fibrillation, for example. There are a lot of treatments to treat HCM, but just as a word of education, if you have a history in your family of sudden cardiac death or an unknown heart condition, really encourage you to learn more about HCM. As I mentioned, when I was diagnosed and even had symptoms as a child, really no one knew what to do or how to go about that diagnosis. But relevant to our discussion today, and really to just share with you a bit about the profound impact that a heart condition can have on one's mental and emotional well-being, I recall very, very easily my first appointment with the cardiologist. I was 30 years old, had just moved to Washington, D.C. to work as a consultant in the federal government, and had what they thought at the time was a cardiac arrest on the metro system underground in the subway. In my first appointment, the first thing a cardiologist said to me was, "You will have a shortened life expectancy." I was advised not to have children. I was told I would be on medication the rest of my life. And it was quite a overwhelming and devastating situation for a young woman. There was no internet. There was really the concept of patient support groups weren't there. And it shaped my life. And what I learned from that now, many, many years later, still kicking and going at it, is how very interrelated my thoughts about what having heart disease meant and what actually the life is that I was living. And I often refer to that as the stories in our head. So we take circumstances, as I did, I can look back in retrospect, and we can have a tendency to awfulize them. And again, there weren't the resources then. It was many years before I became a Women Heart champion and really sort of spoke out about my own condition. But before I did, it was really, really tough going at times.
Yeah.
We have a tendency, as I said, to kind of hear information and we create a story about it. And we create that story based upon sometimes our age, sometimes what we've witnessed in our family. We can feel guilt about it. We didn't eat the right things. We didn't exercise enough. We were being punished. We can feel like a victim. I didn't do anything. I inherited this condition in my case. And all those thoughts really can wear and tear on someone's emotional well-being.
Yeah.
It certainly doesn't help the situation. So I'm very, very thrilled to share my experiences and what I can do today, who is someone who's now retired. I never thought I would live to get to Medicare. So I celebrated my 66th birthday earlier this week. I have excellent medical care. I'm very, very, very appreciative of that and very grateful. But I also know that the responsibility of keeping my well-being and keeping my wits about me really falls on me. And to do that, just a couple of things I'll mention, happy to elaborate on them. Certainly common things we think about being in nature or taking a walk, finding your own normal. I know when I first was diagnosed, I thought, I'm not normal. I just want to have a normal life.
Yeah.
And I think what we have to realize is that, you know, when I was in graduate school, I had a professor say to me, the normal is a setting on your washing machine. Everybody has a different perspective of what normal means for them. And I think it's a heart patient really understanding and being compassionate with your body. I also find that I like to have a safety zone. It's very difficult to know even of your closest of friends or some family members who really can be easily overwhelmed. They don't know how to react. And in your attempts to appear normal, sometimes you feel that those closest to you can't really fully appreciate how to support you. So those good, honest communications, if I'm having a bad day, I need to be able to just say that. If I need you to just sit with me while I'm nervous or anxious, that's what I need in the moment. So kind of understanding your own safety zone of who are your confidants. And sometimes they may be people that you don't see every day. As a Women Heart champion, I've been so fortunate that I've had a 24/7 lifeline friend ever since I took the course at Mayo in 2005. And we have an agreement that no matter what time of day it is, day or night, if we feel anxious, we can't sleep, our head's spinning, we get really in this rut, this spiral that goes round and round and round, that we can just call and talk through it with each other. We don't live in the same town, but we have that arrangement. There's lots of things I also do, a lot of meditation. People understand about that, really helps sort of down regulate your emotions, your anxiety with that. I certainly throughout my life have sought and still do now professional help. So I look forward to chatting more about that. There's no shame in doing that. There are psychologists, psychiatrists, social workers, etc., who are very well versed in the challenges that individuals face living with the chronic illness. And certainly it's been very, very helpful to me over the years. So those are just a few of the things that I do sort of currently, but it has taken a lifetime really of acceptance that my heart condition is one part of who I am. It does not completely define me. I know we can often take labels on. You can be a diabetic, you can be a rape survivor, you can be an asthmatic, you can be a heart patient, but it's simply one part of me. I've had a very rewarding career, have wonderful friends and family. I now currently kayak and I sail, I volunteer a lot. And my heart condition is something that has really shaped my life, but it is not all of my life. And sort of bridging that gap is really what I try to do in maintaining my own emotional stability, my own sense of positivity as very best I can. So I'm very much looking forward to the discussion today.
Thank you so much, Gwen. Thank you.
Sure.
Let's go on to Janet. Janet, I'd love to hear your heart story. And it sounds like, from what I understand, you were only 50 when you had a transplant. It's quite young. So I'd love to hear about your experiences and sort of, how you have managed your challenges and struggles to this day. Are you on? Can you unmute yourself, Janet? Is that possible? Maybe what we should do is, Janet, if you can work on your mute, why don't we go on to Dr. Crawford and then we can come back to Janet. And the questions that already have come up, even just in the conversation with Gwen, and I'm sure it will be reinforced as we hear from Janet, is really around what does it mean to be mentally resilient in the face of life-threatening situations. When we think about the struggles that we face with our health, as we've heard, that is, mental health is physical health. So can you talk a little bit about the link between being diagnosed with a pretty significant chronic condition and mental health, and the extent that those, that there is interplay between those two things?
Absolutely. And certainly when we talk about heart health, we really see that connection, and there's a strong association between heart conditions as well as mental health. And so we especially see this when it comes to depression, experiencing sadness, experiencing low mood, feeling sad. We know that can put the body in a state of stress. And when the body is stressed, there are a number of different hormones that are being released all throughout the body that unfortunately increase one's risk for developing a heart condition, for developing a condition such as coronary artery disease. And so when your body is physically responding to your emotional state, and to be in that emotional state for an extended period of time as the body is just being flooded with these stress hormones, you could see how it can put you at increased risk for some chronic heart related conditions. And we also know that, and we're going to hear even more stories throughout the rest of this conversation about having a heart condition, having a chronic medical condition, and that also producing a significant amount of stress for the person. And when you are managing each and every day, living with this new condition, living with the uncertainty that this condition brings with it each and every day, that can also result in the release of stress hormones that can also initiate a cascade of other changes within your body that can increase your cholesterol level, increase the inflammatory response within your system, that can worsen underlying health condition or exacerbate cardiac conditions that you may already have. So it is clear, based on all of the research that we've seen, that there is this interplay. And we know that when people receive treatment for an underlying mental health condition, we can see improvement in one's cardiovascular health. We could see that when there's treatment for anxiety and depression, that your heart rate goes down, that your blood pressure goes down. And these are all good things for overall cardiac health. But oftentimes when we're thinking about cardiac health, we're thinking about mood, sometimes it feels as though there are things that are out of our control, especially when it comes to receiving the diagnosis. and
Yeah.
thinking, my goodness, there's no hope. What can I do? I took good care of myself. I ate a good diet and I exercised, and this happened to me. What is the point? There certainly is still a point. And keeping up with your emotional well-being by remaining socially connected, having a sense of community, continuing to exercise, and eating in a nutritious way is associated with better outcomes, even when you're diagnosed with a chronic heart condition.
You know, Dr. Crawford, what we often hear from patients is the idea that that they feel guilt, to your point, that they feel guilt that they didn't take the necessary steps to keep themselves healthy. And yet we know that any step that you take from today forward will be beneficial to you. So I just wonder, you know, in your experience, do we have any evidence to say what specifically works in terms of addressing maybe some of the mental health challenges that a person with chronic diseases might face?
Yeah. So there's been a lot of different studies to look at various lifestyle changes that are associated with not only better mental health, but also better physical health. And I know that we hear about this time and time again, but I can't emphasize just the incredible role and the importance that moving your body can have on your overall sense of well-being. And there's been a number of studies that have demonstrated that working out, engaging in moderate physical activity 2.5 hours a week is associated with a reduced risk for metabolic syndrome. And so metabolic syndrome is things having to do with increased weight, increased cholesterol, increased blood sugar. And so finding time within your week, a little over 2 hours, we could see a 10% reduction in metabolic syndrome. And oftentimes when people think about physical activity and moving their body, they're often thinking that they have to do it for a long period of time and do an hour each and every day. But the reality is, all these moments of deciding to take the stairs, deciding to park far from the entrance of that particular store that you're going to, all of these opportunities to increase your physical activity, they can add up to that 2.5 hours total for that week. And so it's important for us to realize that physical activity, engaging in a lifestyle of physical health, it's not a one size fits all approach. For some, that could be running 5 miles a day. And for some, it could be taking the stairs to work instead of the elevator. And so finding what works for you can certainly go a long way. The other thing to that, besides moving your body, is also eating in a nutritious way. The thing is, when one is experiencing significant depression or anxiety, and mentally they're not feeling that great, it can be hard to keep up with eating in a nutritious and a healthy way. But it's important to keep in mind that when we can eat healthy and we're taking in fruits and vegetables and foods that are nourishing to our bodies, in turn, we'll actually feel better emotionally. We notice that we're not feeling as depressed because we're getting the type of nutrients that we need. And we also know that eating a healthy diet is associated with decreased risk for metabolic syndrome, for acute coronary syndrome. It can lower your blood pressure. And so all of these small changes, they certainly add up. And I tell people to start off small. You don't have to completely turn into a vegan overnight. But what you could say is, all right, I only drank 4 glasses of water. Let me increase it to 6 for this week. Or I noticed that I don't really get much fruits in my diet. Let me aim for 1 fruit a day. And those small changes can make a huge difference and add up over time and reduce your risk for heart disease.
And presumably that also then has positive impact on your mental well-being when you're addressing your physical health. I guess not, to sort of follow on to that, I wonder what role you see peer support playing in both physical and mental health as it relates specifically to a heart disease diagnosis.
Yeah, so we know that social support is so incredibly helpful, especially when it comes to heart disease. And we have found that people who have a sense of community, who feel connected, who don't feel alone, who don't feel isolated, we could see that they have improvement in the overall cardiovascular health. We see that they have decreased risk for metabolic syndrome. We also see that their mood improves over time and their cognitive skills improves. Now, living with a chronic heart condition or any heart condition, it's really difficult to keep up with all of the different treatment you need to be engaged in, to keep up with your appointments, to keep up with the lifestyle changes. And to take care of your emotional health by being connected can improve your ability to retain all of that information, all of that factual information, all of the recommendations that your medical providers are giving you, and can make it feel less overwhelming to keep track of, okay, did I take my medication this morning? Do I have an appointment coming up? So there are some really important cognitive benefits that we see with people who have social connections. And it doesn't just mean that you have to have a friend or two. It can mean just being out around people and having opportunities to talk, to share your stories, and to hear their stories too, especially when people are living with a similar condition who are going through the same thing. You feel less alone. And we see that the body responds to that because we see a reduction in the inflammatory response. So certain inflammatory markers have reduced or decreased. And overall, we know that this is all associated with good outcomes, and it can also contribute to a longer lifespan and longevity. So hanging out, being socially connected isn't just about laughs. It has mental and physical benefits that just cannot be ignored.
Yeah, Dr. Crawford, I heard the statistic recently that that loneliness can have the impact of be the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day, which just astonished me, just in terms of the health impact of not having that social connection. So it's really powerful. You mentioned feeling sort of sad, and I wanted to get your perspective on how a person can tell the difference between sort of normal feelings of sadness and a more serious condition of depression. What are some signs that they need to be looking out for?
Mm-hmm. So sadness is a normal human emotion that we all experience. And I can imagine that a number of people who are watching this, and especially if they've received a diagnosis with a second, it's due to a heart condition, there may be a period of profound sadness that you may experience. The sadness regarding the loss of a sense of normalcy, regarding the loss of a sense of kind of living carefree, kind of the loss of the sense of being like everyone else. And that can really make people feel low and have a low mood. But when we see that sadness that could be triggered by a diagnosis, could be triggered by worsening heart-related symptoms, when we see that the mood symptoms, when it interferes with your ability to function, then that is certainly a red flag that you may need some more support for your mental health. So what do I mean by impairment of functioning? What do I mean by your symptoms getting in your way of your ability to function? Now, when it comes to functioning, that means how are we doing functioning in our social relationships?
Mm.
If you're noticing that you don't want to be around people, you're canceling various gatherings at the last minute, when you're avoiding people, when you also notice that your work functioning has decreased, meaning that you're not as engaged in your work, you're missing deadlines, you're unable to get out of bed to actually go to work. And for those who are in school, you're noticing that your grades are starting to fall behind. And if you have significant responsibilities at home and being in a caregiver role and noticing that you're not able to take care of your children as well as you were before, you're forgetting really important details or missing certain events related to your children. And if you're missing these things because your sleep is impaired, having difficulty falling asleep, staying asleep, and noticing that you're sleeping too much and it's getting in the way of all of those things. You noticing that your appetite has changed, you're not able to focus and concentrate, and seeing that it takes a long time for you to make very basic decisions, noticing that you're quite indecisive. And also having negative thoughts about yourself, feeling like a burden to other people, and just feeling very tired, very low energy. And if this goes on for 2 weeks, it only has to go on for 2 weeks. That is evidence that you have a significant mental health concern that warrants follow up with either your primary care doctor or mental health clinician. It does not have to go on for months. It does not have to result in many months of missing important functions with friends and family and not showing up for work. It only takes 2 weeks. And we all need to keep that in mind.
Thank you so much. I'm gonna come back to Janet now and see if we've got her available. Janet, let's see if we
Yes.
can hear you. Great. So we're gonna hear from Janet, and then after that, we're gonna bring everyone together to have a conversation. There's so many questions that I've got ready for everybody, but I wanna give Janet a chance to share her heart story. Take it away, Janet.
Okay, hello everyone. At the age of 48, I was diagnosed with heart failure. I was told that a virus attacked my heart and put me in heart failure. And soon after that, I started experiencing the symptoms of heart failure. And it got to the point where my ejection fracture had dropped down to 15. That shows how your heart operates. So my heart was only working at 15%. And that's what's qualified me for a heart transplant. When they first mentioned the heart transplant, I'm thinking, how in the world do you need a new heart? Like, how does that happen? It was just like a whole new world, and going through the evaluation process. In the meantime, my heart was getting weaker and weaker. Walking and breathing at the same time was a challenge. I had a pacemaker because my heart rate kept escalating. Got promoted to a defibrillator because I was getting a lot of cardioversions. So I had to get the defibrillator. The defibrillator was going off like every single week. That thing was going off. I had a storm one night where it went off 12 times. It was just a nightmare. But I knew every time it went off, it was actually saving my life. And one incident, I was actually in the shower and I could feel it pacing. And what it does is it paces before it actually shocked you. So I'm like, okay, this can't be good. And got out of there, went to get dressed, and went to tie my sneakers, and the force just bounced me back on the bed. I just bounced off the bed.
Wow.
And my sister was standing there with her eyes real big. And I'm like, you got to dial 911. And she stands there. And then I had to get up, walk around her and dial 911. Then I said, you had to go downstairs and open the front door. And she stands there.
Uh-oh. We have a
Heart rate. So that went on and on and on until I was in and out the hospital. Every time the defibrillator goes off, I had to go in the hospital. One time I went in there, they was all set to send me home. And the nurse came in and said that my pressure was low. And I told her my pressure is always low in the morning. Boom, I coded. So it was at that point where they decided that I needed 24-hour care because I was just sitting there. I wasn't doing anything and I coded. So I had to live in the hospital 6.5 weeks waiting for the heart. The whole journey was a bit much because before this, the last time I was in the hospital, the day I was born. And then at 48, you tell me I need a new heart. So even being involved with the hospital system and in and out the hospital, all of that was just different.
Yeah.
I had a sister who's a nurse, so I talked to her a lot because they was just speaking a different language to me. Like I had no idea what they was talking about. So I would call her and say, well, they said this, what does this mean? But eventually I had got to the point where I had to rely on my team and they just had to explain stuff to me. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm sorry, but I haven't been in this world. And no family history of heart disease, nobody. And it was like, it had to start somewhere, but I didn't have a heart attack. I didn't have a stroke. It's just a virus attacked my heart, put me in heart failure. It was a long journey. So I lived in the hospital for 6.5 weeks and finally received my gift of life. And doing cardiac rehab, you had to go to cardiac rehab because you're walking around with this heart you wasn't born with. So you have to know what you're able to do physically. So after I was done cardiac rehab, they were like, the heart is a muscle. You have to join a gym. And I'm thinking, do I look like I go to a gym? But I'm very compliant. So, and I did learn to swim undergraduate at Temple University. So, and plus I hate to sweat. So I said, well, I'll just swim. So I went to Temple, I started swimming. Then I found out they had Olympic Games for transplant patients. I'm like, well, cool, I could do that. So I signed up for backstroke and freestyle. Freestyle is a bit of a challenge, and I found out when they was giving me the evaluation for the heart, I had sarcoidosis on my lungs. And I'm like, that's why I couldn't swim freestyle because, that was sitting there all that time. So I went to my first games, transplant games in Louisville, Kentucky. And the scariest part was climbing into that Speedo at 50. Okay. And I'm thinking everybody's looking at me, but it's age group. So people ain't paying me no mind once you get to the 50 age group. So swam the 100 backstroke, 4 laps of the pool, and received my first silver medal. My heart was not a year old. So I've been going to the transplant games for years. Representing Team Philadelphia this year. It's going to be in San Diego, California. And I've been going to the World Games. This next year is going to be in Australia. So I have earned 53 medals, 23 golds, 15 silver, 15 bronze. I give my medals to the donor family, the family that God said, my child is sick. He needs your heart. So I give my medals to my donor family because my heart is gold. Like I don't need medals. This is gold right here. Yeah. So, but it's just been an amazing journey, and you just want your life back. And I know the whole time I just wanted to go home. And for me to become an athlete at 50 was not on my radar because I wasn't even thinking about work. I just wanted to go home and take a shower. That was it. Those are the only goals I had. Go home and take a shower. But it's been an amazing journey. I took 20 months off of work. Wow. And when I was sitting in physical therapy one day, they have 4 steps in there. I could not get up those steps. It's like I couldn't get up the 13 steps in my house. So I'm sitting there thinking, when I get this heart, it's going to get a beat down. Okay. I had no idea how it was going to happen. And then I said, I am not going to be that spectator. I'm going to live my life and I'll do stuff I never did before. So when I went back to work, there was a note on a bulletin board. They needed women for all women's dragon boat team. Did I know what that was? Nope. But guess who signed up? And I did that for 5 years, and it was amazing. Paddling on the Schuylkill River, but that's some dirty water. So, but it was just amazing. I got to do that, and I just try stuff. Like for the next year when I go to the Worlds in Australia, I'm adding archery. I swim, I do shot put, distance, javelin, and a long jump. So I will be adding archery at the Worlds because they don't have them at the U.S. Games. And I'm like, I have this second chance. I have this life, and I am not going to take it for granted. I'm going to love my life, and I'm so appreciative to my donor family. During the worst time in their life, they said yes to donation, and I am having a time of my life.
Amazing. I can't help but smile because of just, listening to your inspiring story. I want to bring all of us back into this conversation, because I think what sort of is percolating in my mind is how somebody said, maybe it was you, Gwen, that said, we all have different ways of sort of defining normal. Who is it? Maybe it was, and I think we also, it sounds like we have different ways of defining thrivership. Now, I have been informed that I have made up that word. So for those of us who haven't heard the word of thrivership, it's really resilience. But I like to think about it as thrivership because we often hear about survivors. And I want to talk about thrivers. And that is sort of, you too are sort of the epitome of thrivership. So maybe we start with Gwen. How do you define thrivership in your own life?
Wow. I think for me, I define it as doing the very best I can and having some self-compassion on the days I can't or don't.
Yeah.
And realizing that many of the things and the expectations that I had about what I would be doing at this point in life, just like to Janet's story, we all, life isn't linear. We all have ups and downs thrown our way. We have crises come our way. Everybody on this call is adjusting to news that maybe they never thought they would have. So really, resiliency and thrivership is just kind of better understanding yourself. But I also think for me, it has involved over the years, now decades, really a strong sense of self-compassion, forgiving myself, asking for help when I need it, realizing that not every day is going to be perfect. So that's how I would define it.
Great, thank you. How about you, Janet? How would you define thrivership?
I would describe it as removing the limitations, because people hear you have a heart condition, first thing they think is heart attack, but you can't look at the limitations if you have them, and you can't own them, because there's a whole world out there and there's plenty of things you could do, and you just have to do it, and you just have to not be afraid to do it. Because as a chaplain at Penn, I could get my men, they go to the games with me, but the women, they I don't think I could do that, So it's personal, it's personal, so where you want to take yourself. I knew, as much as I thought I loved my prior life, this life has been amazing. You know how you say your children got the best years of your life? No, these are the best years of my life. I'm doing stuff that I would have never thought I would be doing. And was not that athlete, but it's a pleasure representing Team USA. It's a pleasure standing on a medal stand. And where else could you wear red, white, and blue? So I just think it's amazing, and I'm just having such a great time. But you can't look at your life and say what you can't do. You just have to push.
I want to put together what your experience and what you talked about with something that Dr. Crawford said earlier about you don't have to compete in the worlds today, right? There is sort of, you can take that step and say, I'm going to swim 10 feet, right? Mm-hmm. I admit I'm a timid swimmer. So what you describe, I'm thinking, oh, no way. You sort of want to take those baby steps. So Dr. Crawford, to sort of from what you've heard from Gwen and Janet, what are some hallmarks of thrivership in some patients that you've seen?
Yeah, and so I just found the stories that we've heard from Gwen and Janet just so inspirational. And I couldn't believe when Janet, you said you have 53 medals. My goodness, that's amazing. But this idea that, yes, you have this condition, you have this diagnosis, but it doesn't define who you are, and it doesn't define what your true potential could be. Right. And sometimes it's hard to keep in mind that it is possible to remain hopeful while you're on this journey of recovery and of healing. And one way to ensure that you can thrive and be able to thrive towards your full potential is to think about what sort of supports you need to have in place to get you there. And so one form of support could be, all right, I'm going to need someone to drive me to my appointments so that I can take care of my health. I'm going to also need a partner to go with me to my first time to the gym because yeah, I don't want to put on leggings. I know that people are going to be looking at me, but I want to have a trusted partner with me as I take the first few steps on the treadmill right after my surgery. Thinking about an army that you need to put together to make sure that you are uplifted on your journey along recovery is really important. And being in the act and engaging in the process of envisioning what you want your future to look like and what you need in order to get you there, and make it such that you have a sense of purpose, a feeling like there's a direction that you're heading towards, rather than being in a situation in which you don't see a path forward, where you cannot see your recovery ahead of you, and you're thinking about what is happening right now and what has happened to you. And so all of those things sound easier said than done, right? It's really difficult. But being able to have compassion for yourself, like Gwen said, not every day is going to be a gold medal day, but to remember that you're heading in that direction for the gold medal. It doesn't have to be a linear and straight line approach. There's going to be some ups and downs, but when you're focused on what lies ahead, then these kind of bumps in the road, these speed bumps, they won't seem as big. They just feel as though they're part of your overall journey. And I imagine thrivership is like that. And so that's why thinking about who's in your corner, because that can bolster your mental health, your emotional wellness, so that you are fully equipped and have the capacity to thrive.
Yeah, that all so I think relevant to the experiences, not just of Gwen and Janet, but of many women that we have in who are part of our champions community here at WomenHeart. I want to go back to Janet and Gwen and ask about how in the now 15 years or so that you have been involved with WomenHeart, what have you taken out of from the experience? I think champions, WomenHeart champions, come to the organization in order to help other women. But I have a feeling that you have gotten something from helping other women. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that and how that maybe has contributed to your thrivership. Let's start with Gwen.
That's a great question. I think what comes to mind to me, Celina, is that we all are blessed to have an increasing amount of access to medical and scientific information. So when you think about it, whether it's through social media, the internet, et cetera, the medications, where to get good care, et cetera, is increasing as we go, right? But then there's this sort of glue that puts it all together, our emotional, mental well-being on a day-to-day basis. And I think where my role with WomenHeart and the women that I've met over the years have been that quiet voice in the night on the phone that I mentioned earlier. I think that knowing that their experience, whether it is in a test or a procedure, a facility or a doctor, they can give you some tips or some clues that can kind of ease your anxiety about it. They've walked in your shoes, but it's amazing to know that someone gets you. And when someone says, even if you look normal, so many people would say that, well, you don't look like a patient. And I'm always like, well, what do you think a patient looks like? So, you have the ability to have an instant connection, a heartfelt, literally connection with, in our case here, another woman who really knows what it feels like, even if they have a completely different condition and different age, different part of the country, different history, to really understand how very, very lonely and how isolating sometimes and scary. It's just downright scary. Listening to Janet, I'm getting scared for her. It is scary to know what you know and think your body is going to let you down. It is a scary process. And
Mhm.
so having somebody that, I've met so many great women and just folks through Women Heart who can just simply look at you and sort of get who you are really means a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. And how about you, Janet?
I'm actually involved with the Sister Match program.
Yes.
So the person I'm matched with, she actually lives in Georgia, and she's a second heart transplant patient, which you never meet them because most people are not well enough for a second heart.
Mhm.
And she had a lot of stuff going on in her home with her husband, this, that, and the other. But I had to tell her, you have to look at what you got. I mean, you are RN with an MBA, okay? So you got to look at what you have. But she gives me a lot of information. Like my patients think I know everything. I call them my patients because I met them as patients. But and I'll be like, well, I had this patient and she's gone through cancer. After she got to heart, she got cancer. And I said, her stomach is huge. And she was telling me how the cells in normal stomachs like decrease, but in cancer stomach, I mean, she gives me a lot of information. And then I have an office at Penn, well, not my own office, but where I keep my Women Heart bags at. And when I was on the one floor, I wasn't even visiting this lady, but I was walking in the hallway and she was like, I don't want to go home. And I'm like, oh, that's my first thing. How am I gonna get out of here? And she said, I really don't want to go home. And I said, what's going on? So I walked into her room and she told me that the love of her life, her husband passed
Oh,
2 months ago, and she's gonna go home to an empty home.
yeah.
So I called the nurse in and I said, what resources do y'all have for her? And they was like, well, she has a son, but he don't live here locally. I went right downstairs, got one of my Women Heart bags, and I gave her the number, the support system, and I just told her to call somebody.
Amazing.
And so you can have that conversation because you have to share the information because heart disease is not a solo act, you
Yeah.
know. You need support, you need a community, you need, but you'd be like losing your mind. So
Yeah.
it's not a solo act. You need that support system because it's just so important to keep you uplifted. And
Yeah. Thank you. For our audience, I want to remind them that you can use the Q&A section or the chat if you have any questions that you might have for our panelists. But I want to come back to Dr. Crawford and sort of ask you how you would advise somebody who might be newly diagnosed. I think what we're talking about here is we're talking to two women who have incorporated their heart disease into their life, and as Gwen rightly said, it's one aspect of who she is, but there are many other aspects of who she is. So how might you advise somebody who just got a diagnosis, let's say of heart failure, or has just had an episode of or a heart event like a heart attack?
Yeah, so I think it's important to know that one will experience a wide range of feelings and emotions during this time, especially in the period of time immediately after receiving a diagnosis.
Right.
And you will probably hear from a lot of people in your community, everything is going to be okay. Don't worry about it. We're here to help you out. And all of that support is great and it's excellent. And at the same time, there may be days in which you don't want to hear that or want to keep to yourself or want to be upset and sad, and feel as though there isn't a space for you to share that side of you. And I think it's important for people to know at the onset that having emotions, having a wide range of emotions is normal, and it's okay to express those emotions and to say, I am having a bad day and having this diagnosis is awful and I'm angry about it. The more that we can verbalize what it is that we're experiencing inside, we can reduce the negative consequences of having bottled up negative and intense emotions. And so being able to identify outlets and spaces to talk about the difficulties that you're facing with the diagnosis, with the treatment, with the prognosis is incredibly important. It's just as important as having spaces of positivity, right? Where people are showering you with positive affirmations. It's also important to have a space where you can verbalize and share all parts of yourself. The other thing that I think is important to keep in mind at the onset of receiving a diagnosis like this is that, as I mentioned before, it's not going to be a straight line, a linear course when it comes to recovery. And to know that upfront, that yes, there will be setbacks when you go to cardiac rehab, and it will be hard. And there will be an opportunity the next time to make up for it. And to be able to know that there's always the next time, there's always the next day, to give it a try, to give it a different approach, and to see what works for you. If it seems like a certain mindset, a certain form of therapy, a certain form of physical therapy training that you're doing just doesn't click, see what the next day holds, and don't hold on to that thinking, oh, treatment is awful, being physically active, I can't do this, or I'm experiencing these side effects from the medication, my life is going to be like this forever. It's like this right now, but it doesn't mean that it defines your entire journey of recovery. And to be able to kind of have that insight and that mindset with you each and every day as you move forward.
Yeah, and I guess back to Janet and Gwen, I'd love to hear maybe just a few sentences about what were the emotions that you were going through. And obviously it'll be slightly different for each of you because you had different experiences, but what were the emotions you were going through when you first realized I have to, define myself as somebody who is dealing with heart disease? I know, Gwen, you said you've been living with heart disease your whole life, so it might look different, but did anything change for you when you were told that you had the genetic sort of the HCM, genetic predisposition?
Yes, it did, Celina. And again, just for everybody on the call, that was 1988. So quite a few years ago. And, but it really compounded the sense of isolation. I think at the time, I felt that my hopes and dreams had just vanished. I was a young woman. I was not married. I came from a very traditional Southern small town family. So getting married and having children was pretty much my highest aspiration in life at that age. And I already felt behind because I was 30, right?
Yeah.
And being told not to have children, advised against it, which is not what they say today with that condition, really sort of took away, I think, as a young woman, a lot of who I wanted to be. I sort of felt really empty inside. I was certainly felt very alone. My doctor only had one other patient that had this condition. And I didn't feel I fit in for a long, long time. And I didn't know, I was very skeptical about who to share the information with, etc. So that was many, many years ago, but it did have a profound effect. And I think even for anyone who's listening, when you have those thoughts of isolation, even with the world as open as it is now, you can still feel very alone in your own head. And all the things that I think we've talked about today are so beneficial. Reaching out, peer support, the things Dr. Crawford has mentioned. But for me, it was quite devastating for a young woman.
Mm. And Janet, what about you? When you first, you said, what do you mean? I've not been to the doctor my entire life, and now you're telling me I need a new heart. At that point, what emotions were you going through?
Like, gotta be kidding me. But you have to settle into it and be compliant, get as much information as you can, and to make sure you understand the information. Because back then they gave you this big old booklet like this with a staple in it. Now the patients got little nice thin loose leaf books, and I'm like, and you open a page and I just couldn't connect myself to the information. And then finally, one of my nurses, she would come to my room at night and said, she'll just open a book. She said, "Do you understand this?" I said, "No." And she would sit there and explain everything. But I knew that it wouldn't be the end of my life. Some kind of way I knew that, although I'm in the hospital waiting for a heart. And I just knew I had to get through to the other side of through. And I just had to see it as a season in my life that's not going to last forever, you know, because I figure in my life, the only thing lasts forever is eternal life. So I just had to be patient. And I knew that God was totally aware of the situation that I was in. So I had comfort in that. And I really relied on my faith because it was a bit much.
Yeah. We're coming to the end of the hour, but I want to sort of give everyone sort of a last chance to offer up, you know, if you could offer up one piece of advice, what is something that sort of, you know, you learned in your experiences, you know, both professional and personal, in sharing, you know, what it means for you to be thriving despite all the setbacks, or perhaps because of the setbacks that we face in our lives. Just thinking about the folks who, you know, have tuned in to us today, who have really appreciated, you know, I've asked our team to look for questions, but she said there's nothing but messages of, you know, affirmation and thanks, because I think we said it earlier, you know, we don't share our stories enough. So I want to say thank you to especially to Janet and to Gwen for sharing your stories. But I want to ask each of you to, you know, what is your nugget? What is your one nugget that you might want to share with our audience? And why don't we start with Gwen?
Sure. I think my message to anyone listening is that you have many gifts and talents to share with the world. And heart disease is one part of who you are. And it may be that you want to find the message in your mess, so to speak, but that look for those opportunities to share your story and to realize that your gifts and talents are so uniquely needed by many, many women out there.
Great message. How about Janet?
We all have unique stories because everything affects everyone differently. And I say that, you know, we basically take our hearts for granted because they're so loyal, but your body speaks to you loud and clear. So I think you have to listen to your body and listen for signs, get regular blood pressure checks, get regular annual appointments, and you just have to be in tune because I had my annual that October, and this happened in November.
Wow.
And that's why that night they wanted to keep me. I'm like, I don't want to stay here, but because I had just had my annual. So, but you know, heart disease is disguised in many different ways. Like it's hard to diagnose it. It's not like a mammogram, yes or no. So just listen to your body and move. Your body was built for you to move. I have a walk group me with my sorority, and I tell them 30 minutes is only 2% of your day. 30 minutes is 2% of your day. So, I mean, do increments of 10, like 10, 10, 10, you know, but just move your body. They were created to be moved. I mean, they're complicated and all of that, but they're amazing but complicated, okay?
That is comes straight from a 53 medal winner right there, folks. So move your body.
Yeah.
Last word, Dr. Crawford.
You can't have good heart health if you don't have good mental health. And it's so important not to forget that. You can do all of the treatment recommendations, take all of the medications, eat the right diet. But if you are experiencing significant symptoms of depression, anxiety, ongoing symptoms of trauma, you need to set time aside to get those issues addressed so that you can continue to take your care of your overall physical health.
Thank you so much. I have had a great time listening to all of you, feeling inspired, learning a lot, but just really excited to have had the opportunity to meet you all. I hope you've had as good a time as I have. And I know that this is being recorded, so we will be able to share it, and we'll share the links with you all on the call. Thank you again. Thank you so much.
No
Thank you,
problem.
Celina.